how do the standards play a role? How do we provide regulation that meets the goal but is not completely disruptive to systems and processes today, but allows companies to extend what they're doing in a way that makes sense so that there's really added value for what we're trying to achieve.
Hello and welcome to the Next Level Supply Chain with GS1 US, a podcast in which we explore the mind-bending world of global supply chain, covering topics such as automation, innovation, unique identity, and more. I'm your co-host, Reed.
And I'm Liz.
And welcome to the show.
So today's topic, food safety and food traceability, is one that impacts all of us really on a daily basis. Whether we're going to the grocery store or a restaurant, we as consumers assume that the food is safe. At least that's my assumption. Reed, is that one that you make as well?
I do, especially at a store. I assume it's safe. If it's in my refrigerator, I don't make any assumptions whatsoever.
It's questionable, right?
That's right.
Yeah, same here. I want a robot to be able to tell me, yeah, don't eat that, so I don't have to smell every single thing. But alas, today, we are going to hear from Angela Fernandez, VP of Community Engagement here at GS1 US, to talk to us about what the FDA is doing to keep our food safe and traceable, and also what we are doing as an organization with industry. Angela, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
We're really excited to have you. There's so much work that you've been doing with the FDA and with industry for so many years, so your expertise is going to be awesome. Would you just quickly introduce yourself and give us an overview of what your role is here at GS1 US?
Oh man, you're already setting such a high bar for me, Liz. I've had the pleasure of working with the organization for over 21 years, and I have the opportunity to work with most of our key customers on a regular basis. This is where we really, understand what industry is challenged with and how we're going to develop requirements and work on solutions from, our food service folks, where you're going and eating at the restaurants, all the way through to the hospitals where we're caring for you and making you look great through apparel. And as you mentioned with the FDA, right, we engage with government a little bit differently. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about that, but also have the pleasure of working with them as well.
That's great. We're really happy to have you with us and spend some time with us today. So I'm going to jump right in. We hear a lot about the new era of smarter food safety, as well as the Food Safety Modernization Act and proposed rules. Can you give us a little bit more about what these are, how they've evolved, where are we up to this point, and why they came about?
Yeah, absolutely. So those are some great questions. And I know there's a lot going on in DC right now with food safety and a lot of great programs, but it does get complicated very quickly. So I'll actually start with the new era of smarter food safety, because this was announced about 2 years ago in July of 2020. And it really represented a new approach to food safety, how we could leverage technology and other tools to create a safer and more digital traceable food system, right? So it's really just about digitizing everything in the food supply chain. So they put out a framework, and it's kind of a 10-year outlook, if you will, around how we can enable food to be traced to its source within seconds, so that we're using data analytics to be able to strengthen our prevention techniques and also to be able to remove food that may be in question much quicker, right? So that we really, as consumers, are always ingesting, safe food. But it's more than technology. There is a big focus, but it's also around how do we use modern approaches and more effective processes as we look at digitizing that supply chain. So the initiative is actually broken into like 4 pillars to support that 10-year vision. The first one is that tech-enabled traceability. It's moving very quickly, right? We've all seen what's transpired just in the last 24 months of how much we've automated and digitized and relied on technology, either as a consumer or as a company. And then the second pillar is around smarter tools and approaches for prevention and outbreak response. So how are we testing our food? How are we recording information? How are we identifying when changes occur if we're monitoring the food? right at time of production, processing, or even as it's going through transit. The third one is around new business models and retail modernization. I mean, that world continues to evolve, right? You can go to the restaurant, you can have the box delivered on your front doorstep, so you can make it yourself. You could have the restaurant food delivered. You could have groceries delivered. It continues to change on how we engage and get our food for our families and how we choose to eat. And then the last piece is around food safety culture. The culture is very important, and we need to make sure that there's a heightened focus on that. And we're continuing to leverage tools that come into play in that, and also be able to educate and extend the teams that are providing that to us. So that's really kind of what the initiative is. It's a way to get the industry to envision the future and things to take into account inside of those 4 pillars I just spoke about, as you look at doing that digitization and taking advantage of the modern technologies that we're starting to see. And then if you switch over to the regulatory side, I think this is where the proposed rule comes in that you were mentioning, Reed. You know, when Obama was president, he signed the largest legislation that we've seen in over 70 years around food, and it's the Food Safety Modernization Act. And one of the last deliverables of this act was around regulation for traceable and recordable records for food. So we did see the proposed rule come out in September 2020, just a couple of months after the new era that I just mentioned, that really kind of outlined what this could look like and what the agency is thinking to regulate. So as one would expect, there are foods that they have deemed for the food traceability list, and this is really where this rule applies, are foods that we see get withdrawal quite a bit, or that are causing common outbreaks when you look at the illnesses that occur annually to Americans, which is quite significant. And it's about how do we capture information, share that information with each other as that product or that food item is grown or produced, all the way through to it goes into a restaurant or it goes into the back of a grocery store to go on that shelf for you and Liz to purchase when you're at the grocery store. So we will see that final rule later this year, and the industry has got about 2 years to comply with what we see.
That's a lot. I really appreciate you breaking it out and breaking that down there, because there's a lot that goes into this. And the 10-year rule, some people might think that that's a long time, and it is a long time, but in other things, it's a short time. And it's glad to see that there's focus on it is the real thing, and continuous focus, because the world is changing. Like, you talked about retail modernization. It is amazing how in 2 years, like, things we didn't think of, it's like, yeah, I'm going to do pickup, I'm going to do eat-in, I'm going to do delivery. They have those delivery commercials about the pizza bouncing around for a reason. It's real, It's like, oh, the box opened. Did we put the pizza back in and still deliver it? So I appreciate you taking us through that. I know Liz has some other questions, and we don't have a lot of time, so we want to get to these.
Yeah, I mean, it's so big between New Era and the proposed rule. From a GS1 US perspective, how are we supporting and also partnering with the FDA on specifically, I guess, in this question would be around FSMA and the proposed rule? For
those that don't know what FSMA is, right? That's the Food Safety Modernization Act. We're going to acronym it. We got to acronym
you're right.
it. So.
You're right. You're absolutely right. And it took me a long time to figure out how to say that. So FSMA. So are we can you explain how we as an organization are working with the FDA? Because this is such a huge initiative for the industry, and we with the standards can kind of help that move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I would say, first and foremost, right, as an industry-driven organization, the main thing that we've been doing with agency is really extending and sharing the voice of industry. Regulators need to understand how our companies run, how our supply chains run, what practices are in place. As you look at those new models, right, that you were just highlighting, Reed, that I had shared, how the product moves through them are very different than some of the traditional supply chain models. So how do we educate them and keep them informed as they're looking at these rules? The second is really around understanding what industry is doing today. Companies have great internal traceability for the most part, right? It's how do we tie that together? How do we digitize that? How do we make sure that that information is shared and understood in the way that it's intended, right? Leveraging what industry has the capabilities to do. And then I would say the third piece is really around that education. How do the standards play a role? How do we provide regulation that meets the goal but is not completely disruptive to systems and processes today, but allows companies to extend what they're doing in a way that makes sense so that there's really added value for what we're trying to achieve?
So you just talked about education. Industry is changing, and how do we consistently share information? But we did a hackathon on blockchain and how it can be used in supply chains a couple years back. And what was really noticeable was most folks just didn't understand how industry really worked. And so, Angela, the education piece is huge, but industry is also changing rapidly, and folks want to implement new technologies and new solutions. But that adds another kink into how do we consistently share information, and how do we share the right information? So long-winded way to my question is, we hear about traceability and one up and one down in the food industry. And I learned about this firsthand at the hackathon a few years back. But I think a lot of our listeners don't really truly understand what this one up, one down in traceability really means. Can you share that with our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't agree with you more, Reed. There's a lot of misunderstandings and misconceptions. And I think when people say one up, one down traceability, they're really referring to the Bioterrorism Act of 2002, which essentially said, okay, I am going to know exactly who gave me what and then what I sold. So what did I receive and what did I sell? And when you look at the regulations, it was really around, okay, I need to identify myself as a food facility. So I need to be registered with the FDA. Okay, check. The second thing was when we talk about maintaining records. So what I received and what I shipped, right? So who did I get it from? What type of food was it? When did I receive it? And how much? And the lot code was optional. Well, if you look at the food traceability list, it is only shelf life, maybe, 10 to 20 days, depending on the type of commodity. So the lot code becomes essentially important. And I think that was the missing piece that we started to see play out, even as you look at as far back as 2006, right? You couldn't find spinach anywhere. FBI was surrounding farms and facilities. So how do we start to get to talking about our food in the same way and sharing that information like the lot code information, which is really how critical tracking events and key data elements got coined, because the Institute of Food Technologists were hired by the FDA in 2010 to do a whole task order to trace tomatoes back to see what was happening inside of our food supply chain with these commodities. And the reality is we couldn't trace them back to the source. And it was because we were missing those key data elements every time there was a critical tracking event. So the tomatoes were sold as is in the grocery store, or they were in a manufacturing facility and chopped up and put into a salsa, or they went into the back of the restaurant and they went into the tomato bisque, and they also went into the salad, and they also went into a dish with the chicken. So it was really important to kind of understand that journey and the specific type of product and the farmer that it came from.
Yeah. There's a lot to it. We take, as everyday consumers, we really take it for granted what's really in the whole process. But when a problem hits, we want to know all the answers right away. But then there's contractual things too, right? You talk about information being shared, but then it's like, well, there's a lot of stuff that goes into this. It's never as easy as the everyday person thinks. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Well, and Reed, to your point of contractual, now it's going to be regulated. So not only do you have an agreement with your trading partners, you're going to be needing to be able to comply with regulations. And Angela, you touched on CTEs and KDEs, and that's one of those pieces of terminology are within this new proposed rule. And when you hear them at first, at least this is, what we've been hearing from industry is, oh my gosh, what the heck is that? And it's one more thing I already have to do. Can you explain from, how we're working with industry, but also a CTE and a KDE, is that something that industry already has, or is that just renaming something and we're all kind of going to be speaking that same language now?
Yeah, that's a loaded question, but a good question.
I know.
I mean, the short answer is yes and yes, right? Because when you look at, key data elements and critical tracking events, so key data element, right? What it is, well, that's the G10, right? What's in a UPC barcode. It is, where is it at? Well, it's at, Angela's farm, and maybe I've got an identifier, for that, and my lot and batch information and dates, right? And then you look at the actual critical tracking event. Well, I just said the Bioterrorism Act was one up, one down. Now, it never stated it had to be automated, so that was the other thing. But my shipping record would be an event. So I'm receiving a shipment that Angela's Farms delivered, right? Or I am then sending out a modified shipment to Liz's restaurant or to Reed's grocery store, which then created another event. So have we been doing that? Absolutely. I think what you see in the proposed rule is getting to that lot and batch information that was missing from the Bioterrorism Act of 2002. And also all of those different modifications. I was talking about tomatoes. Well, let's switch and talk about the bell peppers, right? Because I know this is popular too with the produce folks. Angela's farm may have, a couple of different lots, and one's got green peppers, one's got red, and one's got yellow, and I will sell them independently. But then I've got someone who's packing for me, and they'll make them into the stoplight peppers, right? That you buy in the grocery store, the 3-pack, the red, yellow, and the green. Well, I've commingled so many different products, and they probably came from different lots. And again, that goes back to being able to read analytics and understand what kind of food challenges we may have depending on the environment or what may have happened in that specific set of land where those peppers were being grown. So yes, we're doing some of that today, but I think industry is definitely has to extend and leverage their capabilities to meet some of these additional areas of information that we saw come out in the proposed rule.
Angela,
and aligning on the terminology.
Yes.
Yeah, the terminology, right? I mean, CTE, KDE, understanding, key data elements versus critical tracking events. And Angela, it's just so apparent that you've been doing this such a really long time, because like you were describing let's switch to bell peppers and then the whole traffic light. And I'm like, yeah, my kids do think that looks like a traffic light when we're getting the bell peppers in the store. So thank you for that visual. But Angela, I know that the GS1 US community engagement team also works with healthcare industry quite a bit. And is there anything that the food industry is learning or could learn from things that are going on in healthcare? Because in healthcare, we have pharmaceutical drugs and other things that are just as critical to our health. And food is a real critical thing to our health.
Yeah, absolutely. That's another great question because you're right. I mean, the channels and how we sell product and how we receive product continue to blend quite a bit. And with healthcare, we absolutely are seeing pharmaceuticals. Maybe I'll choose that one, right? Because there has been regulation. They're a much more regulated industry than we are in food. But they've got the Drug Supply Chain Security Act that was released several years ago. And they're actually looking at chain of custody for drugs. So you actually have to identify a drug item when it's produced and then keep all of this information with it. Some could say those were key data elements, and you've got critical tracking events, right? At time of production, at shipping, at receiving, all the way going into the back of the pharmacy or the back of the hospital. So when you look at the standards we have for GS1 to record those critical tracking events and key data elements, this is actually something that the pharmaceutical industry has been working on implementing for the past couple of years, EPCIS or Electronic Product Code Information Services. How do we capture that information in a standardized way at a certain point in time to be able to then share that with our trading partners so that we truly have that electronic record and visibility of what happened with that product and how it got transformed or how it moved from one location to another. So since they've been doing this and they've got certification for vendors that are offering some of these solutions, we absolutely can learn from them. And they tell us that it's all about data governance, right? Because you find out, especially upstream, we don't have the data that we need. And then once you get further down the supply chain, it's, well, I've got 3 different versions of the data set. So how am I going to work with those 3 different versions, right? So back to the data. And the other piece that pharmaceuticals are doing is the 2D barcodes, right? So we talk a lot about that from a GS1 standpoint, not so much in FSMA, but even in Sunrise 2027. Their compliance dates for all of the Drug Supply Chain Security Act is November of 2023, which quite honestly is around the corner. So having that 2D barcode, we're already seeing over 90% of all the pharmaceuticals in the US carry that, which is the same information. It's the item number, its serial number, its batch and lot, and its date. Some of the things that we're talking about in the food system of embedding and sharing as those key data elements during those critical tracking events. So understanding what to watch out for, or some of the easy low-hanging fruit learnings so that we don't make the same mistakes as we're looking at those data elements, I think there's a huge opportunity.
Wow, that's some significant points in there. And just for, our listeners, some folks, 1D barcodes, 2D barcodes, they get it. A QR code is a great example of a 2D barcode. But the pharmaceutical industry moved to that 2D barcode because it could hold more information readily available right at the point of engagement. Is that it, without having to do major data dips, or was there another reason for it, or multiple key reasons?
Yeah, it was also regulated. So when you look at that act that I was referring to, they do state that you have to use a data matrix. So
data matrix, right?
Conventional barcode was regulated.
Perfect.
However, they chose to use the GS1 data matrix so that we could put all of those additional elements in their bead, which I think touches on some of those points you were just making. Excellent.
Yeah, we definitely want to take those learnings and best practices, because if we can do any plug and play, gosh, why not? Shifting gears a little bit, and we already touched on it a little from the different ways that we're buying food. I mean, my food delivery, my chef meals were just delivered this morning, and I never would have done that 2 years ago. So we know that the supply chain has been disrupted. Is there anything else you're seeing that's kind of evolving in that space? Is this going to be something that we continue to see disrupted? Are we not just going to have food delivery to the house, but are there going to be different ways and shifts that you see coming that we need to kind of be prepped for? Or should we just always be ready for change?
Yeah, I think we're definitely going to have to always be ready for change, right? I mean, you hear people say the supply chain's getting ready to break. Well, some would argue it's already broken. You hear every day, right, about our inflation prices, right, which go back to supply chain. We had a driver shortage before COVID. We have a higher driver shortage today. You've got that ties to the networks, right? The 3G network is no longer available after this year. But if you look at all the trucks, which are monitoring the temperatures of all the food moving, they don't run off of 4 and 5G. A lot of them run off of 3G. And then that goes back to a shortage, right, of how we're able to equip them and get things upgraded. So I do think we're going to be in a constant state of change for a while. Forecasting is a thing of the past from a supply chain perspective. We have nothing but disruptions. I think we continue as an industry to react to them the best that we can and continue to service the needs. But I do believe that we're going to be in a constant state of change. We have not found what is the new normal, if you will, so to speak.
So the new normal is constant disruption, is what you're saying.
It very well is. Yes, absolutely.
And then it's almost like what you can do with what you said earlier about healthcare. It's all about data governance. So what can you do to get a good, solid base and foundation so that as things are shifting and changing, you can be as ready as you can for not knowing really what's going to be coming down.
Well, absolutely. And I think that ties right to the technology advances. I think it's kind of an old saying now, right? Because I think, a couple months into the pandemic, I mean, we saw technology go light years ahead. What happened in less than a year was being projected in a 3 to 5 year time frame. I don't think that's going to change. But if you look at standards, right, data structure, the way we identify things, really at the core of where we as GS1 sit, you are more able to switch from one technology to another, or to extend the data set and information you have in your organization to trading partners, because it enables that interoperability piece. And I just, you hear it, as I mentioned, from the healthcare folks, and I think it's going to continue to be a focus even as we move towards the regulation. It's about the data and about the governance. Everything else will come with it.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. I was going to ask about innovations in tech, and you've kind of already addressed it, which is that it's constantly changing, but the standards are almost agnostic to the new techs that are coming out. GS1 US always gets pinned with, oh, you're the barcode company. And, we say, yes, we are, but we also are in RFID. We're also in 2D barcodes. We work with a lot of different things. We're actually technology agnostic. And I share with people, I'm like, you get a global trade item number, and that can be your UPC. You can leverage digital link and turn it into a URI and put it into a 2D barcode. You can program it into RFID. You can put it on a blockchain. So it really starts to get leveraged around a lot of technologies. I'm glad that you brought up that little nuance, but it's significant because it comes down to the end of the day, data governance. Whether you want to do retail automation, robotics, or anything else, it comes down to that data governance at the same time. I would like to shift gears here and get to know you just a little bit better and ask you one of our favorite questions is, right now, what technology are you using that's your favorite? It doesn't have to be work related. It could be, anything that you're using, but what's a technology you're like, wow, this is amazing and we enjoy using it?
So I don't know if it's a technology I enjoy using, Reed. So I might answer a little bit differently, because one of the things that excites me, quite honestly, right now from a technology perspective is what you were talking about with RFID. And maybe this goes back because I was hired when I was a child, because I'm a child prodigy. That's why I've been through this for so long. But in the early 2000s was when we created standards for RFID technology. And I think, there was so much excitement and potential. And, we did realize some of it, but then I think everything got soft and quiet. And that has been re-energized, and I would say even expanded. We are seeing not just high-end items look to have RFID technology in use, but how we enable that across different supply chains and different categories. And to me, it's personally inspiring and energizing, because I see all the possibilities now, because we're looking at the technology a different way. The investments are a little bit more palatable now than they were 20 years ago, but it's opening the door to so many different possibilities. When we talk about just overall visibility, how can I be informed? How can I react? How can I predict what the consumer or what I'm going to need or my family's going to need? I mean, that's a technology that helps to enable some of that.
That is really cool. I'm still caught on the child prodigy thing here because, yes, you have been here for a very long time, but you're very youthful. I'm jealous of that. But the RFID, it's kind of fallen into that Moore's Law, right? Where it's cheaper, smaller, faster, more things. And there's a lot of cool stuff. We were meeting with Sanjay Sarma, who was our very first guest on this show from MIT, talking about chipless RFID and all these other things that they're doing. And I'm like, most of us, there's a lot going on out there. So I appreciate you sharing that. That was very cool.
I actually cut my teeth on RFID too way back in the day, and putting RFID tags in pallets, in plastic pallets, and putting beer on them. And way back in the early 2000s, because I also am a child prodigy. It's fascinating what can happen. It's also fascinating how long people's memories are, and having to shift some of the connotations of, oh, it's not going to work. No, it really can unlock so many different use cases. It's just really cool seeing people change their minds about it. So that's awesome. Okay, our last question. Tell us about something that blows your mind. So it can be food safety, supply chain visibility, RFID. It could also be something in your everyday life. So Angela, tell us, what blows your mind?
So I'm not saying this just because I guess it's the new buzzword, but the metaverse, honestly, is blowing my mind, because right when we talk to our apparel folks and just how much people are paying to, get their avatar with the right brands, right? And it just physically, I had a hard time matching up a wonderful bag with a pair of shoes, right? So making my avatar look good. And then even, McDonald's made the announcement, right? I think a couple of weeks ago about opening their first store in the metaverse. And I think of my children, right, who are school age. And it's like, okay, well, while they're playing Roblox, they can go into the McDonald's and they can place an order. And then it will physically come to the door and they never have to leave the game. For someone who grew up when they had telephones that had the cord and you couldn't get out of the kitchen fast enough, right? And you would wrap yourself into 3 other rooms so your parents didn't hear the conversation. I mean, it's amazing how far we have gone, especially in a digital world. So.
It truly is amazing. Now, I'm not a child prodigy by any means. I'm more like, I would like to think I'm Benjamin Button. I'm starting out really old and I'm going to get younger as I go along. But it is. The metaverse is quite the topic. There's a lot of discussion about it, but it's significant change. And this is a corny little thing, but so was cable television. That was a significant change, right? And then the internet was a significant change. And then smartphones were significant changes. And it's really cool to be a part of it. So, Angela, we really just want to thank you for spending the time with us here today and kind of going through FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act, and the whole one up, one down, and the different things that are really getting pulled into all of this and what we can learn from other industries. I mean, that's really what we need to be doing is sharing. Sometimes it's looking at the adjacent data streams or the adjacent industries that we're working with. There's a lot to be learned with, because one thing is for certain, and you hit it, change is constant, but the speed of change is also increasing. So thank you again for being on the show today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was great to spend the afternoon with you.
Thank you for joining the Next Level Supply Chain with GS1 US. If you enjoyed today's show, you can subscribe to our feed or explore more great episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to share and follow us on social media. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.